welcome to Find the Way. I'm Mike Sherbino, and I'm so glad you've joined us today for what I believe is going to be a very helpful and directional program as we go on this journey of life. And Ashley, thank you for joining me again. Although
Hi.
you really didn't have a choice.
No, that's kind of true, but happy to be here on our third show, and we're broadcasting coast to coast. So hello to all our viewers in the West and in the East.
And on the prairies.
Oh, that's right.
We've never made it to Newfoundland yet, so special shout out to all you folks as well. You know, we were excited, Ashley, as we did the radio, and to see this program merge to this is really something that we give thanks to God for. We're grateful that it's supported by the gifts of generous friends like you, but it really is a miracle that we're here today. And as we address the issues of life, I believe that you will find help, you'll find hope, and even healing, especially with the difficult subject we're going to tackle today.
Yeah, we're talking about death, which isn't really easy, and some difficult circumstances in life. But we have a great guest who's written a book called Detour, and I'm really excited to interview him today.
Yeah, I'm getting to know Cam so well, and his story is remarkable in his road to recovery as he walked through the valley of the shadow of death. And we're going to talk about that from Psalm 23, what David was talking about, because many people are going through valleys, aren't they?
Oh, it's very true. All of us have difficult circumstances.
So regardless of your circumstance, I hope you'll stay with us for these next 28 minutes as we come to you and as we share with you how you can find hope and direction for this journey called life. Welcome back to Find the Way. As we begin this today in our whole study on Psalm 23, we want to talk about the verse that for many people is the one that's so familiar. It says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And actually, before we talk about it, before I preach on it, I just thought we could talk about a subject that nobody ever wants to bring up, and that's the whole subject of death. And we're surrounded by catastrophic things that are happening in other parts of the world. Sometimes we see a terrorist action happen here, for instance, like I think of Las Vegas. There's many other places, of course. But why is it, do you think, that we have created such an insular mindset about such a reality such as death?
Well, I look at kind of that topic, and it's interesting. You can see the news so much more than you ever could before. There's various avenues. But until actually something is happening really close to you, it's almost like we're oblivious to it, or maybe we feel saddened for a brief moment, but it doesn't really pertain to us. So we're not really gonna go there. When
I was younger, I had a mindset that I would live forever. Is that still the mindset of millennials and younger people today?
I'm not really sure if I can just create an answer for all of the millennials, but I think sometimes when you're younger, you just begin to think, I have so much time, I have so much left to live, or I have time to figure things out. Or a big motto right now is just living in the moment, being present. What do you have right now? And so you're just not really thinking about how long is life going to actually be.
You had a very close friend and mentor, Jack McLaughlin. What happened to him? It happened so quick.
Well, Jack was older in years, so people would say, well, at least he had a good life. But he was also very healthy and young for being 78, and he was on his way to New York City and dropped dead going to get a coffee before he was going to get on a plane.
Apart from the grief and the sadness, how did that shape your worldview, and even as you brought it into yourself about what do I do with the whole subject of death?
As I get older, it's harder because I think I've encountered quite a bit of death in my life, losing friends, losing loved ones, people like Jack. But what really happened, and we're going to talk about it more even in the coming weeks, but for me to stop and look and say, what's the kind of legacy that I'm leaving, and what's really important in life? And that's when Jack passed away, actually. That's something that I wanted to stop and really think about. And also to go, is death really the end? Is this really the final say on it all?
And that's a good thing to think about, is death really the end? Because for the next 4 or 5 minutes, I want to teach from this Psalm, Psalm 23 and verse 4. And let's just pick it up. It says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, I can't say for sure what was going through David's mind when he wrote that verse, but I have a hunch that he was thinking back to that moment when he was about 16 or 17, and he was walking down into the Valley of Elath. You might not remember that name, the Valley of Elath, but you will remember this name, Goliath. Goliath is the reference point. We think of David, we think Goliath. And what was happening when he was going down there? He was fighting a giant on behalf of his own country. Goliath was the prize fighter of the Philistines. Matter of fact, not only was he tall, close to 9 feet tall, but I always remember this. It says the tip of his spear weighed about 15 pounds. If you're not sure how heavy 15 pounds is, think your Thanksgiving turkey if you have a medium-sized family. This guy was a big dude, even to be able to throw a 15-pound spear that far. And Goliath sees him, he laughs. But David says this, "You come to me with a sword and spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled this day." David had a confidence, which I've been referring to in previous weeks, that came from his trust in the Lord. It's what sustained him as a young man. It would be what sustained him until the day that he died. Even for a man like Jack Ashley, who was your close friend and mentor, I know his faith in God is what sustained him. But all of us have to walk through the valley. There are so many different kinds of valley experiences. You can think about that for yourself today. Maybe you're walking through the valley of exams and you're panicking. And I remember those moments of just the gut-wrenching studying times, and sometimes I'm not sure if it even paid off in the end, but nonetheless, they were hard times. But the valley might be even greater. Maybe you're through financial pressure. And we see of so much foreclosure. We know the difficulties of purchasing and owning things, and yet we're among the most wealthiest of all the world, and yet people still struggle financially. But what about when you get the phone call and the doctor says, "I have some bad news for you," and our heart sinks? That becomes a valley. Or it could be the literal valley that David is talking about when he walks through the valley of the shadow of death. Can I ask you this? Are you ready for what is ahead? Regardless of your age, you need to think about that. Someone has said we should take 5 minutes now to think about the most important thing that will impact us, which is death, which also is eternity. And yet I believe that as a Christ follower, eternity starts the moment that I trust Christ with the very essence of my life, to say, "Jesus, you be the leader and Lord of my life." I think we face the valley when we realize, hey, this is not what I scripted. And of course, like many valley experiences, what is looming in front of us just seems to get bigger and bigger the closer it comes. But David says this, "I will fear no evil." What is it that is grabbing at your life today? What are the fears that you are facing? No doubt about it, whatever your valley is, I want to suggest that there are 3 fears that you need to think about. And how it faces you, and how it grabs you, and how it wants to twist you. Because fear wants to immobilize us. Fear wants to inflate the object greater than it really is. And fear will intimidate us. It will stop us. And we have a fear of the future. That's a huge fear. We have a fear of what our friends will think of us. And sometimes we have a fear that we're not going to have a family. And by that I mean that there's going to be no one who's going to genuinely care for us. I'm not sure the valley that you're in today, but I'm going to invite Ashley to push back right now on what I've already shared so that we can begin to unpack it even more so that you can enter into it as well. So Ashley, as I shared those things, what was going through your mind? What was registering? What were you saying? I'm not sure, Mike.
Well, when you actually talk about fears, I don't think everyone believes they live with fears.
Why is that?
Well, you gave the example of the fear of what people think. Well, a lot of times people will just say, "I don't really care," or "I don't really care about what's ahead," or "I'm just going to figure it out." So they might not even know that they're living in fear. That was something I even had to recognize in my own life.
So you're saying we live with a lot of denial.
Yeah, we do live with a lot of denial. But it's starting to see the little things in the ways that it creeps up, and actually even what this passage is referring to, that we can actually have a sense of freedom and live without that kind of fear, like anxiety, stress.
You know, and what you just touched on is so key, because the freedom that we can have is when we face our fears. And David learned that when the Lord was his strength and his salvation, he said, "Whom shall I fear?" It's actually one of his famous lines. "The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" And that's something pretty powerful to hold on to, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Why do you think a lot of people say, "Not yet, not right now"?
Not yet. Like, I don't really have any fear. Is that what?
Yeah, exactly. Why do we push back when God makes such a great offer?
something we've talked about before because we don't really think that we need it, because we think we're the author of our life. We think we have it all together. It hasn't really quite crumbled yet. And so we're not even aware of our deep inner need for that.
You know, Ashley, as I come back and teach the rest of this passage, what we're going to find out is regardless of where we're at, David knew, he said, even though I walk through that valley, I'll fear no evil, for you comfort me. That's the power of this thing. He says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Rod and staff were things that the shepherd would use. And now David is saying, just as the shepherd comforts the sheep, knowing that they're being watched for by the shepherd, God, who is our heavenly shepherd, wants to comfort you. I'm grateful that I'm walking in that comfort, and part of the mission of Find the Way is to help people to know that they can enter into that comfort as well. We're going to be back in just a moment, and I'm going to continue on with the teaching. Well, not only does David talk about God's comfort in his life as he walks through the valley of the shadow of death, now he talks about God's presence at the table. And in the strangest verse we read, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Who in their right mind would ever create a feast, a banquet feast, prepare a table when the enemies are all around? If anything, it would be dine and dash. You don't want to sit down for a long, luxurious meal. So what is David talking about? Regardless of what he's facing in the valley, or regardless of what he's going through, he said, the presence of God is a reason for celebration because he is with me. We do not have to fear. Let's pause for a moment and think about the table analogy. Many times in our own family, what has happened at the table has just been significant. It was a gathering point. We had a large family, and so when we get together, it was a lot of fun. When we get together on holidays, it's a lot of fun. But if you ever think about what happens at a table, you might connect the dots a little more closely with what David is saying. Because if you eat at a child's table, likely you're going to have Oreo cookies and milk. If you eat at the table of a 10-year-old, it's probably going to be hot dogs. If you're a student, the main menu is going to be craft dinner, no doubt about that. Some of us lived on craft dinner when we were going to college. And if you're at the table of a young couple, well, it might be burnt offering, and you know how it goes. And if you're at the table maybe of a senior citizen, well, it seems that things are high fiber. But regardless of that, the question is, whose table are you feasting at? And when you eat at the table of the Lord, as David talks about, he said, it really is a feast. It really is a celebration. And that's what David wants you and I to enter into. It was Dallas Willard who said that God is the happiest being in the universe. And the happiness comes when realizing that he's in control. So David is saying, regardless of what's around me, there's an element of joy. There's an element of celebration. That's why Paul wrote in Philippians 4, verse 4, he said, we can always be full of joy. Or Nehemiah said, it's the joy of the Lord that is my strength. And Jesus would talk to his disciples. He said, I've told you all these things that I will be with you. Why? So that your joy may be full. When David talks about being at the table of the Lord, it's a picture of satisfaction. It's a place of feasting. It's a place of incredible joy. And to eat at the table of the Lord is a symbol of the life of fullness that God wants you to have, regardless of where you're at and regardless of what you're going through. And we've all seen signs that say swim at your own risk. I've seen some where it says ski at your own risk if you're a downhill skier. Sometimes it's ride at your own risk. And I've gone to a few sketchy truck stops where I thought they should have put a sign up that said eat at your own risk. Friends, you're eating at your own risk when you're not eating at the table of the Lord. Let God nourish you. Let him encourage you with his promises. Let him remind you by his Spirit that he is walking with you. David, I think more than anything else, despite being the great warrior, the man who accomplished so much, he really dumbs it down when he says, just walk in the presence of God, enjoy the feasting, the joy that can be at his table. Actually, as we think about the whole analogy of the table, and we've spent a lot of table time together, what jumps up in your mind as you think of this passage from David's perspective?
Well, I actually just think it's the perfect solution to what we were talking about before, right? If you have the fullness, if you know where you're feasting, you don't actually have to be afraid. you don't live in that fear. You don't have the shadow of death that just hovers around you. And so it's not like we're just left to deal with it. What we can experience is the fullness of what we receive at the table.
And it's interesting that it hinges on who we trust, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, but I think that's the whole journey of faith. We don't just come to that belief simply. It's often through a series of difficult circumstances and things that we're working through in our own heart to really go, can God be trusted? Am I going to actually receive here what it is that I want and what I'm going after out there?
The fellow that you're going to interview later on in the program, Cam Taylor, I know his journey a little bit, and it wasn't what he scripted, but he had to make a significant choice of who he was going to trust in the middle of going through the ordeal that he's going to share with you.
Yeah, and he talks about in his book, Detour, which is the perfect name, about how he came to that. His life took a different path, it took a different route, but what actually sustained him in the end.
And so regardless of whether you're on a detour right now or walking through the valley, I'll be back in a moment to conclude what David's thoughts are in this passage. But take heart, God is inviting you today to come and sit at his table and enjoy the feast that he's prepared for you. Well, I'm not sure about you, but whenever I think about the table and I think of a celebration, my mind often wanders to Christmas. You know, Christmas is one of those times when it seems that you take about 30 hours to prepare a meal. Well, at least my wife does, and some of the girls. I pretend to help. And then you have about 20 guests to send to eat it, and it's all gone in 20 minutes. And we say, wow, what happened? But there's memories, there's fun, there's enjoyment. When David talks about feasting at the table of the Lord, he's talking about the whole overflow of joy and excitement that God wants you and I to live in. And we see this when he writes, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. The anointing of the head with oil was an Eastern way of showing recognition to a person of honor. The perfume, it would smell nice. It was a way of honoring someone. It was part of the celebration and the part of the feast. Now, all of us want to be a part of that kind of lifestyle. We want to walk in that joy, and that's where God invites you and I to live day by day. I believe that's part of the compelling reason we're drawn to this psalm, regardless of where we're at in our faith journey, whether we're not sure whether we believe or whether we're a bona fide follower of Jesus Christ. We want to know comfort. We want to know joy. So this is what David is implying through this passage. First of all, as he talks about feasting at the table of the Lord, I believe it's synonymous with living a life of purpose. All of us want to live a life of purpose. So did David. We want to make sure that what we're doing really matters. It really counts. You know, you can't live a life of purpose if you're eating at the table of busyness. Are you eating at the table of the Lord, or are you always so busy? Could it be you're neglecting family, friends, the people that are close to you? A lot of times we eat at the table of busyness and we have a good excuse. You know, I'll get around to other things later on, but right now I got to take care of this. Sometimes we're trapped by living at the table of money. I want to think about this with you for just a moment. Are you consumed about making more and more and more and trying to feed the more monster? If that is what is consuming you, you're eating at the wrong table. Jesus invites us to discover something more by looking to him. And then some of you today are at the table of relationships. You're hoping that someone else will meet the deep need in your life, and yet you're coming up empty. Many times as a pastor and marriage counselor, I would tell couples, don't get married to someone until you're sure that you can live by yourself. Because if you're hoping to find someone that you can live with that can meet all your need, you're going to be deeply disappointed. And so David invites us to cultivate first our relationship with God. And that's where the strength comes from. So we can live that life of purpose. And then if we're going to live the life of purpose, what naturally happens when we're at the table of the Lord is we discover that we're living a life that's full of peace. So we want to be full of purpose. I want to live a life of purpose. I want my life to count, but I also want to live in peace. It'd be a good question to say, is David saying too much about God? Can God really deliver this? But David discovered that it's true. I've discovered that it's true. And hundreds of thousands of people throughout the world are turning to Jesus because they're discovering that He is the way, the truth, and the life. This life of peace is something that can embrace you right now. And when you have the life of peace, there can be the feast, there can be celebration. Have you ever gone to someone's party and you've been all upset and you've tried to put on your game face and it's just not working? Maybe you got the game face on today, but God is looking at your heart and He's saying, friend, He said, why don't you experience my peace? Because when we experience His peace, then we discover that the silent prayers that we've been offering to God, the things that we've been crying out to, He actually hears. You see, when you're sitting at the table of the Lord, two other things happen. You can both rest and you can relax because the Lord is with you. That's why David said, the Lord is my shepherd. He knew the Lord was with him as he walked through the valley of the shadow of death. And today, God is inviting you to come and to feast at His table. Ashley's going to interview a special guest, Cam Taylor, who's going to share his story. And the table that he was sitting at seemed to be anything than a feast table. Matter of fact, it was a hospital table. But as you hear his story, you're going to discover that what was a main detour in his life became a road for him to find a life full of feasting and full of joy.
Welcome back. I'm here with Cam Taylor, and it's a pleasure to have you with us.
It's great to be here.
And Cam, you are a leadership coach. You also do a lot of transition work. So you work both within the church place and also in the secular field, in the marketplace.
I do, and I enjoy the whole world.
Yeah, and you've done speaking, and also now recently you've written a book called Detour. I love the title.
Well, I'm looking forward to telling you more about that story.
Okay, well, let's jump right into it. What took place and what provoked the writing of this book, Detour?
Well, this book came about because of a very sunny day in April of 2011 when my wife and we got our motorcycle out, put the plates on it, went for a wonderful ride that was supposed to be uneventful. But unfortunately, on the way to our destination, a car pulled out right in front of us, and we hit the car. I had to lay the bike down, and that started a very long journey of recovery. I almost died at the accident.
Really? Were you airlifted actually?
We were airlifted, both of us, right off the highway back to a hospital in the Vancouver area, and that's when they started to put us back together again.
Wow, so life just totally took a turn because you're going out on a nice afternoon and you're planning on just going for a bike ride with your wife. So talk to us about the series of events that happened afterwards, and it was a long road to recovery for you.
It was, and I use this analogy of a detour because, you know, this road ended the road I was on, and when I woke up 2 days later in the ICU, looking at my kids and wondering what in the world just happened to me, I started to think, you know what, this isn't going to be too long. I'm an optimist. I'll be back on my feet, maybe 3 or 4 months. But that went along, and then 4 months later, I had my 4th surgery, and that's when I really hit the skids, and it got worse. So,
what do you think when you're lying in bed? So at first you're optimistic, and now you're going month by month, and you're lying there and you're waiting. What starts to happen internally inside of you? Are you angry? Are you contemplative? Or what's going on?
Well, I would say that I would describe it very similar to any kind of a loss that a person experiences. Now, granted, I have a whole lot more perspective several years later and after writing and processing, but at the time, it's like you're going through any kind of a grief process, any kind of a loss where you're in complete shock when it happens. And you get completely angry and ticked off, like, why did this happen? Why did this guy pull out in front of me? So if you think about grief, that's exactly what I was going through.
So what was that purpose for you that you found?
Well, for me, and it took a while to get to it because I had a very strong purpose before the accident. My work was going well. I was physically fit. I had run 6 marathons. I was training for Boston. I was on track to live out my purpose. And then after the accident happened, and a lot of my purpose had to do with what I was doing and where I was going and my mobility, right?
And now you're not doing too much.
And now, so 4 months later, I'm back on my recliner in my living room with an uncertain time frame, and my purpose at that point was like shattered. And I said a prayer, said, okay, God, You have to give me a reason to get up in the morning because I don't have one. And so what happened was my purpose was morphed into a purpose that I could live out sitting for 7,000 hours on a recliner. And I would say, without a shadow of a doubt, God gave me things to do, ways to think, people to help, activities to sink my teeth into from a recliner that gave me purpose.
Tell us just a few of what those things were that you did.
Well, one of the things I started doing was writing. I took writing courses. I actually started to learn how to publish books. I wrote and published all the layout. I had to learn all that stuff. So I read books and I took workshops online and I just studied all day long, every day, between physio and surgeries, of course. I was learning how to write. But I also saw my mission was to encourage anybody who walked into my life, whether it was someone to come and give me a bath or cut the carrots or someone I met down at the CAS clinic or my surgeons or the nurses. I just wanted to shine a light and be encouraging to other people. So I really put the focus outward.
So now 7 years later, how has that experience shaped specifically the way you think and what you're doing today?
Well, one very significant thing is I relate to a whole bigger, broader group of people. My empathy muscle has been incredibly strengthened through my own suffering, through my own loss, my difficulty. I look at people differently. When I hear of a loss that somebody has, I get emotional and I start to tear up and I think, wow, I feel the pain of others. So that opens doors. And I think it helps me in my coaching and in my training, my work with people. It helps me to kind of feel the humanness of our society. There's so much brokenness. There's so much loss, so much trauma going on in our world that it really has given me a whole new place to stand and to help people from. And that's really what I created in this book, was a pathway to get through what you're going through.
Thank you so much for joining us, Cam.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm excited to tell you, all our viewers, that Cam's book, Detour, is available on our website. Just go to findtheway.tv and you can access your free copy there, but only for a limited amount of time. We're going to be back in just a moment with Mike with some concluding thoughts.
Thank you for joining us today at Find the Way. I hope you'll get a copy of Cam's book. I invite you to go to our website at findtheway.tv. And for a small price for shipping and handling, we'll be glad to send you this free copy so that you can not only enjoy the book, but find direction in the detours that you're facing or maybe a loved one is. Regardless of what you are going through, I hope you will know and realize how much God loves you and cares for you. He wants to walk with you. And just like David discovered that the Lord was his shepherd, even when we walk through life's deepest valleys, we do not have to fear because He is with us. He is going with us. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Mike Sherbino at Find the Way.